This is Jason Anderson, Chairman of the Killenly Town Council, and I am calling this reconvened annual town meeting to order. It is currently 7:01 p.m. on Monday, June 2nd, 2025. At this time, we will turn over to the town clerk, who will read the call to the meeting.
Town of Killenly reconvene annual town meeting Monday, June 2nd, 2025, to be adjourned to machine vote. The reconvened annual town meeting of electors and citizens qualified to vote in the town meetings of the town of Killenly, Connecticut, shall be held pursuant to Section 701 of the Killenly Town Charter in the auditorium of Killenly High School, 228 Putnam Pike, Killenly, Connecticut, on Monday, June 2nd, 2025, at 7 p.m. to consider and/or approve the following: ordinance approving the operating budget for the town of Killenly for the fiscal year July 1, 2025 to June 30th, 2026. Be ordained by the Town Council of the Town of Killenly that in accordance with Section 1005 of the Town Charter, the budget for the Town of Killenly, Connecticut for the fiscal year July 1st, 2025 to June 30th, 2026 in the amount of $23,629,755 allocated to general government and $47,938,817 allocated to education for a total combined budget of $71,568,572 to be adopted. Killenly Town Council, Jason Anderson, Chairman. The resolution setting the date, time, and place of the reconvened annual town meeting and adjourned reconvened annual town meeting and machine vote on the 2025-2026 budget ordinance. Pursuant to Section 1007 of the Town Charter and Section 7-7 of the General Statutes, said town meeting at conclusion will be adjourned to the aforesaid ordinance as submitted, will be submitted to vote upon machine scheduled between the hours of 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. Tuesday, June 10th, 2025. The ordinance will be placed on the voting machine under the following heading. Those approving the question will vote yes, and those opposing the question will vote no. Those voting no will have an additional advisory question: is the budget too high or is the budget too low? Number one, shall the education budget for the town of Killenly, Connecticut in the amount of $47,938,817 for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2026 be approved? Voting will be held at the following polling places: District 1, District 3, and District 5, Board of Ed Central Office, 79 Westfield Ave, in the cafeteria. District 2 and District 4, Killenly High School, 226 Putnam Pike. Absentee ballots will be available on the morning of June 3rd, 2025. Please contact the town clerk at 860-779-5307 as soon as possible. All ballots must be issued in person according to Connecticut General Statutes. Killenly Town Council, Jason Anderson, Chairman. I now would like to open nominations for moderator of the reconvened annual town meeting.
I'll make a motion to nominate Mr. Anderson for moderator.
I second that motion.
Are there any more nominations? Are there any more nominations? Are there any more nominations? I'd like to make a motion to close nominations.
I'll make the motion to close nominations.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Now I'd like to vote on Jason Anderson as moderator of the reconvened annual town meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? I'd like to turn the meeting over to Jason Anderson.
Thank you. At this time, we will turn the meeting over to the Superintendent of the Board of Ed to go over the proposed Board of Education budget.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Killenly High School. Thank you for coming out tonight. In the next 15 minutes, I will provide an overview of Killenly Public Schools and provide clarifications around some information. Next, I will share the Board of Education's adopted budget, followed by a review of the Town Council's adjustment to that budget. Lastly, I will review the proposed reductions and potential impact. To provide context for this presentation, I supplied a list of all districts in Windham County. Killenly is the second largest amongst 17. Killenly's per pupil expenditure is $20,989. This is a calculation that takes the number of students over the total expenditures. The county average is 23,000 and the state average is 22,000. Killingly's current student enrollment is 2,414. These students are broken up amongst 5 schools. We also currently have 59 students who are placed out of district. In this slide, you will see 10 prior years and 10 projected years of enrollment. Killingly student enrollment remains relatively steady for the next 10 years. We are also an alliance district, along with all other K-12 districts with student enrollments of 1,000 or more in Windham County. This classification was established in 2012 by the Accountability Index. I will share more about that index in the following slides. 36 districts are currently alliance. As an alliance district, we are held harmless from education cost sharing grant funding reductions. We also receive a grant for $328,000, which we use for the purposes listed on the screen. I mentioned the Accountability Index as the way the state initially classified alliance districts. I am often asked, how is a district released from alliance status? In theory, a district should show steady growth on the 12 accountability indicators. Here is Killingly's overall growth from 22-23 to 23-24 on the Accountability Index. We are making good growth when compared to neighboring districts. An indicator with the strongest growth in Killingly is college and career readiness. Killingly students take more AP, dual enrollment, and career and technical courses, as well as meet more benchmarks for SATs and AP exams than our neighboring high school students. This is in part to our thriving Career Center, known statewide as a model of success. We currently offer 29 career pathways. Additionally, we offer many student organizations, and most of these organizations compete and win nationally. From our Ag department placing amongst the top 16 programs in the nation, to our robotics team, who was literally just on Fox 61 News last month talking about their first, second, and third place at nationals, as well as international titles. To our Student Technology Association, who are sending a team of 6 students to compete in nationals later this month. And those are just to name a few of our students' accomplishments that prepare them for life beyond our walls. Another indicator where we see tremendous growth is student acceptance and enrollment in 2 to 4-year institutions. Here are all the pictures I could fit on a slide. They represent just a handful of nearly 200 acceptances of our students into institutions. And lastly, the indicator measuring our elementary students' growth on state testing has shown a tremendous increase in reading and math. We have shown the most growth when compared with neighboring towns. So much so that KMS was awarded the School of Distinction from the State Department of Education for their growth. And we all know these accomplishments do come with a cost. I, just like you, worry about where the state of education funding is headed. Schools do not live in bubbles immune to rising costs, yet our community expects and deserves these great accomplishments from Killingly Public Schools. School districts must become more forward-thinking and solutions-based, and that is what we have aimed to do. Our Therapeutic Academy will open in the fall, and while the 25-26 budget impact will be neutral, in subsequent years, we hope to use tuition from the Academy to offset special education expenses. And we have worked with the Sterling Board of Education to secure an agreement for Sterling students to come to the high school, Killingly High School, outside of the agricultural program. This would bring in tuition money to offset the Board of Education budget. Sterling joins Pomfret and Brooklyn students who can come to Killingly High School outside of the Ag Science program. Additionally, we have separated from EastCon and have taken on the mandated adult education services. This has saved us $98,000 in the 25-26 budget. During the course of the budget cycle, some statements have been raised for which we would like to provide clarity and explanation. One clarification is the Board of Education has allocated $900,000 of DEI hires from the ESSER grant. To be clear, Killingly Public Schools does not operate under any mandate for hiring. We hire who is best for the position, bottom line. However, I believe we have tracked down the origin of this statement. Last year, I shared a few versions of the slide on the left-hand side of the screen. It talks about how some districts were going to fall off the fiscal cliff after the last of the ESSER grants went away. However, the narrative behind the slide that I presented described how we were cognizant of that cliff, and any position Killingly Public Schools wanted to bring from the grant into the operating budget, we intentionally found existing funding sources for, so as not to impact the local budget. The table on the right-hand side is how we were able to bring 4 positions from the ESSER grant into the operating budget. And to be clear, this was for the 24-25 budget year, not the budget I am presenting today. Last year, we presented the Board of Education with several decision packages. The one on the screen were those decision packages from the ESSER grant. Of the 5 presented, the Board of Education approved 4. And the 4 that were approved one had an impact to the budget. That was the .5 BCBA, Board Certified Behavior Analyst, for $19,000. The remainder of those positions were budget neutral because they took vacancies that were already in the budget or were moved to another grant. I hear frequent mention of the non-lapsing account. I thought I would take this time to restate what it is and what it is used for. Last year, there was new legislation that modified authority of non-lapsing accounts, previously controlled by the town fiscal governing body. Legislation shifted that authority to boards of education. Starting on the left-hand side, the non-lapsing account, as always, has been an account where unexpended funds from a school district go after that fiscal year is complete. The amount deposited cannot exceed 2% of the district's entire budget for that particular year. And the use of the fund must be authorized by the Board of Education and must be for educational purposes. Moving to the right-hand column, the Board of Education this year adopted a policy on our non-lapsing account. We agreed that it would still be held by the town, that is, deposits and withdrawals would occur at the town. However, the Board of Education policy states that there will no longer be a cap. The second bullet point explains that process. The Board of Education approves something to be paid out of non-lapsing, and the invoice is sent to the town to pay. Based on this, the non-lapsing account is best used for one-time purchases as opposed to reoccurring purchases such as payroll. This is our only reserve fund for any unexpected costs that arise. If the Board of Education ran out of money in their non-lapsing and had a large unexpected cost, the Board of Education would need to ask for a supplemental appropriation from the town to cover that cost. Currently, there is about $1.3 million in our non-lapsing account. Recently, an idea was presented about using the non-lapsing for startup costs associated with ESS. That stands for Effective School Solutions. This is the agency we are using for the Therapeutic Academy staff. Conceptually, this idea would work. The idea was made in an attempt to save positions that were slated to be eliminated due to the budget reduction. Again, conceptually, this could work. There are, however, many unintended risks and consequences that are important to consider. Starting on the left-hand side, ESS, the agency we will use for therapeutic staff, will most likely not be a one-time startup cost. Next year, the $679,000 allocated for ESS in the Therapeutic Academy, it's primarily for staff. As you can see, there are 7 staff within that initial cost. Many of those staff will be needed to run the Therapeutic Academy for future years, whether we use ESS or we use staff hired by Killingly Public Schools. But to be clear, staff will be needed above the staff that we currently have. The second bullet point explains that in the 25-26 budget, the cost for everything associated with the Therapeutic Academy did not increase the budget. In other words, these costs were budget neutral. We were only going to open the Therapeutic Academy if we could bring back enough of our own KPS students who were currently out of district placed to pay for the cost of the Therapeutic Academy. And we did. So in just a few moments, you will see that there is a large increase in our 300 line, our budget where we are paying ESS out of, and a large decrease in the 500 line where we pay special education tuition. So that is what we know now. On the right-hand side, this indicates what we do not know. We do not know the growth or expansion of the program. We do not know how many tuition students will come in subsequent years. We do not know how many ESS staff will continue with us, if any, or if we will hire our own staff. There is the possibility that we can pay for much of our staff, whether it be ESS or our own staff, through tuition money, should we have several out-of-town students who come in. That right now is impossible to predict. All this to say, if we remove $679,000 from the budget entirely to make up for the proposed reductions, and we do not have enough out-of-district students to pay for the 26-27 Therapeutic Academy staff, we will need to add that cost back into the budget, which will increase our overall budget. And now an overview of the Board of Education's adopted budget. This year, the preliminary budget was reduced to $49.7 million, and the Board of Education adopted that budget in March. The Board of Education adopted this budget prior, so this here is a slide of the Board of Education's adopted budget prior to reductions. Salaries and benefits make up about half of the overall increase. As I spoke a moment ago about the increase in the 300 line, there is a large increase in the 300 line, which is primarily comprised of outside agencies, that corresponds to the large decrease in the 500 line, which is comprised mainly of special education tuition. The 400 line is property-related service maintenance. These are services we use to maintain our property. This includes things from boiler maintenance, copier leases, elevator service, sprinkler services, etc. The 600 line and 700 line show an increase mainly because supply lines and equipment lines were reduced last year in an effort to reduce the budget, and thus now we are restoring those items. Lastly, dues and fees are those costs for professional organizations and other objects, houses, items such as course reimbursement as well as awards. After the failed referendum on May 13th, the Town Council deliberated and adjusted the Board of Education's budget. The Town Council reduced the Board of Education's budget by $1.8 million. This would equate to a $554,000 increase over the 24-25 budget. Thus, reductions equaling $1.8 million were presented at the May 5th town meeting. When making decisions for reductions to the Board of Education budget, we follow a measured and consistent approach. For staff reductions, we look at things like vacancies, graduation requirements, as well as the impact on the accountability report, particularly when it comes to high school courses such as AP classes. We also look at the number of students in each grade and ultimately the lowest student impact. We also reevaluate all other lines outside of salaries for potential reductions. Both staff and other line reductions will now be shared. There were 2 proposed reduction paths that have been presented to the Board of Education. Ultimately, neither has been decided and will not be decided until after this budget cycle draws to a close. Initially, the reductions were presented at the town meeting on May 5th. They resulted in 24 positions eliminated, 1 position reduction, and 7 jobs lost. Reductions in other areas also contributed to the $1.8 million. We increased the excess cost reimbursement estimate from 70 to 75, athletics reduced by 77,000, IT reduced by about 70,000. We reduced maintenance and repairs from O&M as well as transportation, and the buildings had been asked to reduce their supply and equipment lines. Lastly, we have hired at lower steps for next school year. After conversations with the Board of Education over the last few weeks, it was clear the charge was to reduce the number of eliminated positions as well as reduce the number of jobs lost. This is an updated version of that work that was presented to the Board of Education on May 28th. The number of certified teaching positions would be reduced from 10 to 7, 2 of which are vacant. The administrator position eliminations was reduced from 2 to 1. The non-certified eliminations were reduced from 12 to 5. In this particular plan, an increase of 9 reduced positions from 1 reduced position in the previous plan exists. When we reduce positions, we do run the risk of people leaving because the job is no longer financially viable for them. And of course, it goes without saying that when we reduce positions, the work falls on the remaining staff. There is also a reduction of $300,000 from the $679 ESS cost in the budget. Thus, the Board of Education would use $300,000 of non-lapsing to pay for a portion of the Therapeutic Academy staff for the 25-26 school year. Additionally, we would keep all of the non-staff reductions to equate to the $1.8 million. While the impacts of these reductions are far too many to list and many are most likely not evident at this time, here's a short list of potential impacts. Increased class sizes, reduced or eliminated intervention services, delayed responses to parent phone calls, particularly in the summer, increased workload for remaining staff in the summer months, limited school supplies for students, extended student and staff computer replacement dates, postpone non-emergency repairs until later in the school year to ensure sufficient funding for emergency repair work, reductions in custodial services, and reduced home games, tournaments, and competitions. And with that, I thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. At this time, we'll open up for comments. Anyone who would like to make comments relative to the Board of Education budget, please step up to the microphone and state your name and address.
Jim Silvera, 237 Mason Hill Road, Dayville. I'm just curious because I got here a little late because the doors were locked in the event entrance side, so I had to come around. I almost went to the other high school. But anyway, what was originally before the meeting happened last time, before that exciting meeting, the budget was set and then somebody jacked it up by 1.2 million, I think. What is it now compared to what it was after that meeting?
To answer that, the budget the council put forward to the original annual town meeting is the exact same dollar amount that's put forward now on the Board of Education side. So the Board of Education side that the council had proposed and sent to annual town meeting reflected I'll give you the exact numbers. Reflected an increase over last year's budget on the Board of Education side of $554,978, based off of reduction in expected revenue, which is due to the state not allowing the Board of Education to charge other towns for the VOAG program. Students coming from outside of town, Killing the Voters now have to cover part of the tuition of out-of-town students in the VOAG program. That added almost another $400,000, or bringing the total $350,000 to the amount that the taxpayers are going to be paying. So the increase in their budget, while it's $554,000, the increase in taxes that need to be raised to cover the proposed Board of Education budget is $905,000.
So
And
why are we accepting these out-of-town students then? If we're going to lose money on them, why don't we just say BOAG is strictly for Killingley residents?
That is a question that will be proposed to the Board of Education.
Okay, and then my other comments are, it's typical. We get rid of paraprofessionals, we get rid of janitors, we get rid of all the things that have the impact to the most of the kids. We keep the athletic director, which would have paid for all those positions. We keep the assistant superintendents, we keep the assistant director of special education, or whatever they call it in this town. We keep all these, $150,000 positions, and we get rid of the $30,000 position. And we do that just because we want the parents to go in an uproar. So again, at the last meeting, you guys talked about the average cost of the $240,000 house in Killingley. There's no $240,000 houses here, so that number doesn't matter. And then you talked about, oh, it's only $21 a month. No, it's more like $60 a month for the rest of my life. Last year was over $1,000 my tax went up. This year it's going to be $500 and something for the rest of my life. This is not a one-time fee. If it was a one-time fee, it wouldn't matter. It's for the rest of our lives. So again, they got to find a way to, if the other towns aren't paying their fair share, don't let them in. So you know what? We'll just deal with it. Why are we taking a loss? So that's all I got to say. I think this is too high, still too high.
I will address the superintendent or the Board of Education. Do you want to make any responses to his question as to why we're still taking in out-of-town students to the BOAG program?
The reduction in tuition is something that will eventually be rectified. That was a one-time legislative adjustment. It may actually be rectified within the next fiscal year, and so that money may come back to the town. We do not have anything definitive to say that, although the state has said that that will happen. So we do not feel confident enough without something definitive to put that out publicly. However, we do have from the state information that says that that money will come back to the town as revenue, and that will be rectified.
So if the $400,000 comes back to the
Right.
town, where will that money go? Will it go into the unused slush fund again, or will it go back to the town?
It's revenue to the town.
Okay, so it will go back to the town and therefore impact next year's budget. Is that what I can assume?
Impact in which way?
Well, positively, the town will
yeah.
have an extra $400,000 in their rainy day fund
Yes.
or whatever.
Indeed, yes,
Okay, thank you.
of course.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I have a question for Dr. Nash, a clarification question on that. So it's not that we're going to take a loss of well, we are going to lose $450,000, but it's still bringing in revenue, it's just bringing in less revenue, is that correct?
At current time, yes. There is still revenue coming in. There was a 58% cap placed on the tuition for magnet schools and agricultural programs. However, like I said, we do believe that will be rectified. All points are aiming at the same goal, which is that will be rectified in the next fiscal year. We just are still, the legislative cycle is still open until Wednesday, and until that time, we just don't have anything definitive to present with 100% confidence. We would rather be pleasantly surprised and have, show the decrease as opposed to gamble and show it an increase and then be wrong. So hopefully we will see that rectified.
Thank you. So just to clarify, aside from the $450,000, it's not a loss to take in students from some other place. It's just not as much money as we were making before, is that correct?
Correct.
Hi, Paula Broder, 38 Westfield Ave. I have a question about the special school that's going in Westfield. Since that is going to be a school that's going to be available for people outside of Killingley, that going to be another situation like the Voc School where now we have to pay for it because is that a different situation?
Yeah, good question. Great question. It's a different situation. So that tuition, let's say there was a student from Plainfield that attended our therapeutic academy, Board of Education would take that tuition onto the Board of Education side to pay for the expenses of that program.
Okay, so that wouldn't be something that, like, next year, we're going to be seeing, like, a large uptick in the budget because of needing to pay for, you know, the people outside of school as well, like with the Voc School?
Right,
Okay.
totally different. Yep.
Okay, okay. The other question that I have is, could you clarify what you said about how if you don't get a bigger budget, people will leave? Do you
Yeah,
mean
sure.
teachers, or do you mean like custodians or bus drivers, or, I don't really know. All my kids are grown, I'm retired. I don't know how much teachers make. I'm a retired 911 dispatcher, and my raise was based on the town budget, on how much money the taxpayers wanted to pay for our salary. So I guess if you could clarify, is it a contract where everybody gets a raise every year, like no matter what? Or how does that work?
Sure, that's a great question. So most of our positions are negotiated and do have contracts. And there is a certain percentage each year in that contract. Not all, but many. And you had mentioned, when I had said we run the risk when we reduce a position. So let's say a position was a 12-month position, and in their contract, that person's contract, there's a certain amount, a salary, right? But then we reduce that to a 10-month position. So that particular individual took the job for the 12-month salary.
So they won't get paid for the summer, basically?
Right,
Okay.
right. And so they may find that it's no longer financially viable because they had applied and were working under a 12-month contract that is now reduced.
Okay, I
Yep.
see, I understand now.
Okay.
Okay, all right,
Yep.
thanks.
No problem.
I would just like to add one thing. This is Jason Anderson, 125 Lake Road. I'd like to add something to the issue with the reduction, the 42% reduction in out-of-town tuition for the VOAG program. With the state legislature still being in session, I would encourage everyone here and everyone listening at home to reach out to your state legislatures and ask them to push forward legislation which would correct this and allow Killenly's Board of Education to be able to charge out-of-town students, sending towns for the 100% of tuition for the students they send to Killenly for the VOAG program.
Sorry, Frank Alleman, 30 Sawmill Road. Just for clarification so that I understand what is happening, I see from your presentation that the town reduced your budget by $1.8 million, leaving you with $554 in excess. But at the last meeting here, am I correct that you added $1 million back into the budget? And therefore, you are now $1,554,000 over increase. Is that correct?
I'll explain that one. So at the original town meeting, $1.1 million got added to the budget, which would indicate a $1.654 million increase in the Board of Education budget. That failed at the townwide referendum, at the vote, the machine vote.
So-
Once that failed, it then comes back to the council. The council redeliberates on the whatever part of the budget fails, which in this case, the town government budget passed. It was the Board of Education budget that failed. What came out of town council deliberations was reverting back to the original amount that the town council presented at annual town meeting, which is that $554,000 increase. So in a
Okay.
sense, we're back to where we were when the annual town meeting started last month.
Thank you. So on June 10, you'll be voting on the reduction, 1.8 to 554,978. That's what people will be voting on next week.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. One final question. I looked over here at your mill rate statement. So the mill rate going from 20.32 to 21.45 reflects the 554,978 increase. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any more comments, questions? Jason Anderson, 125 Lake Road. I just want some clarification from the superintendent on the slideshow that you had presented this evening. In the slideshow, you had talked about, as you called it, $900,000 of DEI hires from the ARP ESSER grant in the operating budget. And then you talked about 4.5 full-time positions, 4 full-time, 1 part-time position on that same slide. So can you just explain, is that 4 full-time and 1 part-time position a total $900,000? If it's not, where is the rest of that $900,000?
Sure. So we did not carry forward all of the positions that were in the last of the ESSER grants. That's the ARP ESSER grants. These are the only ones we carried forward. All of the other positions, we did not move forward.
Thank you. Next question I have for clarification. When you reference the non-lapsing fund, I have a few questions on that. You stated if you were to run out of non-lapsing money and experience an unexpected expense, you would need to ask the town for a supplemental appropriation. Couldn't the Board of Education put a freeze in place so they wouldn't have to come to the town for a supplemental appropriation?
I suppose a freeze is always possible if a freeze could happen. It's always a possibility.
Someone who's worked in businesses for many years, I know if something happens and you've got revenue that isn't coming in, that's one of the things you do. You put a freeze in any increased spending in place just to control your budget. Other question I have is, you said currently there's $1.3 million in uncommitted funds in the non-lapsing account. My understanding was the last numbers that the Board of Education had passed on to the town's finance director, that there was $1.9 million in uncommitted funds. Is it $1.9 million or is it 1.3? And if it is 1.3, what is the $600,000 in committed funds that haven't been reported to the finance director?
Yes, that's coming over to the town probably tomorrow in a letter. The Board of Education approved money for the access road, and that's where that difference is.
Thank you. How much of the how much of a surplus do you have from the 2023 to 2024 fiscal year budget for the Board of Education that just cleared, that the audit was just finalized on? And how much of that surplus are you, have you discussed putting into the non-lapsing account?
The 1.3 accounts for that surplus. It was 503,000, if you're talking about the 23-24 budget.
Thank you. Any more comments, questions from the public?
I have a question. Dr. Nash, would you, or do you know what the cost is to educate a pupil for a Killingly student as opposed to what the tuition is for the out-of-state or out-of-town ag students?
So per pupil expenditure for Killingly is $20,989, and an ag student tuition with the 58% tuition cap is $3,957.
39,000 or 3,900?
3,900.
So that's the how much the town will get for each out of town ag student, $3,900?
Yes, in addition to the grant that's received on the revenue side, yes.
So I wasn't a math major, but $3,900 out of 20,000 is not 58%. So can we explain the other, say $14,000 or $12,000?
The ag tuition isn't different than the per pupil expenditure, so.
But you said the tuition was $20,000 and you only get 58% from the town that's sending it.
So when I say 20,000 per pupil expenditure, that is different than tuition. So if, like for instance, I just talked about Sterling, students coming to Killingly High School. Their tuition is roughly 15,000. So that's different than per pupil expenditure. We're talking about two different things, so I just want to make sure we're clear on what we're talking about.
So on the 58% number, you're saying that it's only $5,000 for an ag student in Killingly, because you're only getting $3,900 from the towns that are sending an ag student. So I'm trying to understand how that's 58%. Where's the 58% fit into what revenue is being shorted, I guess, to the town for each student?
So there's a cap on the ag tuition that goes for all ag programs. And the remainder of the tuition that comes to the town, be in the revenue, is $3,957. So that's different than regular tuition, that is different than per pupil expenditure. That is a totally different line in and of itself in the revenue side of the town. So actually on page 7, if you have one of the budget books, you can see that the ag tuition line is its own separate line. There's regular tuition, so Pomfret students, Brooklyn students, they pay a different tuition.
So if a student from Pomfret comes here to Killingly, they pay a tuition, and if they're in the VOAG program, they pay an additional tuition, or just they pay less? So they pay less to come here for VOAG than they would for any other reason?
So if you look in the revenue page, you can see that there is an additional grant for ag sciences, VOAG, right? That completes that tuition, if you will. So districts that have a VOAG program are not, are not in a deficit with that. So look on page 7, you can see that there's regular tuition and then there's the VOAG tuition, but there's also the ag science and cost grant. So that number offsets or kind of makes whole, if you will, if you want to call it a reduced tuition for ag science students.
Thank you, I guess.
Hi, Dr. Nash.
Hello.
I have a couple of questions. So on the ESSER grants, this page that Jason was talking about that starts with the DEI hires, were any of these positions being taken out in your forecast for the budget if it passes?
Yes, we have in one of the proposals, in the slide it says a 0.5 BCA, but it was to make a 0.5 position in the operating budget whole. So yes, to answer your question, the BCBA as a 1.0 FTE would be eliminated.
Okay, what about the attendance coordinator?
No, that is not in the plan.
So that's not in the plan. Okay, what about the CHR program that we were told was going to be funded through grant money? It was not going to be a burden on taxpayers. I don't know the exact numbers. I'm not the liaison anymore, but I was told it was like a $200,000 increase when it expanded throughout the other schools. Was that considered for cutting back instead of cutting staff, KPS staff?
CHR is not in our operating budget. It lives solely in grants.
Okay, so that's covered completely by grants?
Yes.
So there's no money going into CHR program from taxpayers?
Nope.
And what's the forecast on those grants continuing to come in?
We will still have grants coming in. There had been some legislation out there that potentially would take away the Alliance grant and switch Alliance status. We actually just got word today, this morning, that that bill has failed. So we will still have our Alliance grants and all of our title grants.
Okay, which leads me to my other important question, this adult education program. So this is new, correct?
It is not new. We have had adult education. It's mandated for all districts to provide adult education services.
Okay.
But it is new in that we are now controlling it as opposed to paying EastCon to control that.
Okay, so this is the transfer over from EastCon.
Yes,
So this is a mandate through the state?
that's right.
Okay, so if they pull grant money, that would end up in the operating budget? Is that what you're saying?
There is a grant that is associated with adult education, so part of it is funded by the district and part of it is funded by the grant. You know, I have not heard that the adult ed grant would be not funded moving forward. I guess in theory, if it wasn't and it was still a mandate, then it would be an unfunded mandate.
Okay, so when you said it's partially funded by a grant, how much of that is funded through the budget?
It breaks down to about 98,000 or 100,000 from the operating budget side, and roughly that amount, a little bit more, maybe like 118 or 119,000 from the grant.
Okay, and did you go, when we're looking at the potential cuts to the jobs, did you go by each department, by salary, by contracts when they're running out, so on and so forth? How did you determine where to cut?
Yes, so we tried to be, pretty measured in our approach. We looked at vacancies, the length of the vacancy. We look at graduation requirements, any impact on our accountability report, number of students in a grade or a class, and of course, always lowest student impact, highest savings. That's for staff reductions. And when it comes to non-staff reductions, we're looking mainly at supplies and equipment.
Okay, and how many are actual position cuts, and how many are positions that are open for jobs but you haven't filled?
Sure. So in the most recent proposal presented to the Board of Education on 5/28, there were 13 positions eliminated, and 2 of those are currently vacant.
So it's 11 cuts to actual positions right now, and then you have 2 open jobs that you're just not going to fill.
Well, they're all positions that will be eliminated from our operating budget. So 2 of them are vacant, meaning there was no one in that.
Okay,
yeah.
that's what, okay, thank you.
That's for certified staff, I just want to clarify that. For non-certified staff, we had, in the proposal, right, there was 1 vacancy out of the 5 there.
So the 3 para-educators, 1's vacant, or all 3 of them are vacant?
We have, at current time, apologies, all 3 are vacant, thank you.
And the 2 custodians, how many custodians do we have across the board? How many employed?
Hold, please, we will get that in 1 moment. All right, 27.
Okay, and those are actual positions?
Those are actual positions, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing.
Dr. Nash, I'm just going to ask for some more clarification on the VOAG program. It almost seemed to me the question the gentleman had asked the way I understood his question, didn't really get answered. Can you tell us what the total cost of the VOAG program is? How many students are in the VOAG program? And I know you would reference the Ag Science grant. In the budget that you have presented to us, line 40, 219 is the Ag Science and the Tech Ed operating cost grant. Can you break down that grant, how much of that grant is used for Ag Science?
All right, take that one at a time. So right now, we have 149 students in our ag program. 34 are Killingly students, and 115 are from sending towns. All right, next question. I think you were asking how much of the ag science, I'm sorry, say that one more time about the grant.
The budget code 40219, the Ag Science and Tech Ed operating cost grant, you're showing $816,400. How much of that is being used for Ag Science?
So that is revenue that doesn't come to the board side. So all of that's revenue.
So what is the total cost of the VOAG program?
So are you asking for, I mean, I can,
Not including the revenues, just total expenditures from the Board of Ed.
776,000.
The reason why I was asking that is because then we have a number that we can divide out the 149 students just to look at that. Which I believe that was the gentleman's question as to how much it costs per student for the VOAG program.
You'd have to add the 3,900, right?
So if you take the $776,000 divided by 149 students, that comes out to $5,200, $5,208. Now, would that, Ms. Nash, would that be a accurate representation of the per-student cost of the VOAG program?
I would say that would not necessarily, there's so many other services that come into play with students. Students that come to the high school from the VOAG program are also participating in everything else that we offer here, not just VOAG. So they take classes outside of VOAG, they participate in athletics or music. So I think that's not a clear representation of how we would figure that out. So, I mean, we know the tuition, we know what the cap is, and I think that's the cleanest way to understand what we are receiving for out-of-town VOAG students.
Thank you.
So I just want to follow up on that. So the Sterling student that comes here for VOAG pays $3,900. They can use the music program for free. They can play the athletics. They do all that stuff for $3,900. But another student that's coming here, say from Sterling, they're going to pay $18,000 or something to come here? I don't know what the tuition is. Is that a correct assessment?
The tuitions are different. That is a correct assessment.
So since 80 or 70% of the VOAG program is out-of-town students, it just seems like we need to rethink this program and limit it to just the town of Killingly. If we're going to lose money on the program, so to speak, which is what we're doing, because $3,900 doesn't even pay for the extra stuff that they're doing. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
This is why we receive a grant, so that we do not lose revenue.
Any other public comment?
Mr. Chair, I have a question for Dr. Nash. Am I correct that in the budget, you had $50,000 added in to the minimum budgetary requirements, $50,000 for students who will potentially not pay for their lunch? Should that not come out of the non-lapsing fund instead of increasing the budget?
That would be a Board of Education decision, but you are correct, there is $50,000, yes.
Ms. Nash, as Jason Anderson, 125 Lake Road. Back to the VOAG question. So I took in your budget, you're showing a reduction of $410,375 on the VOAG line. That is just representative of the loss in tuition that we're now charging, what was it, 52% is what we get reimbursed from sending towns?
That is due to that legislative change that put a 58% cap on.
Oh, 58.
Yeah, on magnet schools, and VOAG, Ag Sciences was also in there, yep.
So in a sense, you can come up with a number off of that per student, because if all we're charging, if that's the 58%, if that shows a reduction of 42%, if you take that 42% reduction, take that $410,000 number, extrapolate it back out, what that would represent as a whole, you would be looking at $977,083. And then if you divide that by 115 students, that would bring it to $8,496 per out-of-town student, that if we were getting paid 100% tuition.
That would be a lot of math, but I will take your word for that, I'm not sure.
Any other comments, questions?
I just have one more question, Patty George. How many, where did I see? Where it says one administrator position would be eliminated, district reading consultant position. Is that a vacant position or is that a filled position?
At current time, that position is not truly vacant. The individual who is in that position is also in the role of the interim KISS assistant principal. So that person is actually doing 2 jobs right now. It is not vacant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn this reconvened town meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion was made by Mr. Cottula, seconded by Ms. Wakefield. So this meeting will be adjourned to a machine vote. The machine vote will be on June 10th at your regular voting locations, being the location on Westfield Ave and also here. And the times that the polling stations are open are 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. That being said, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. 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 Opposed? Abstentions? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you for coming.